What's up, Wargamers? Welcome back to World of Wargaming. Today I invite you yet again to grab a seat, a snack, and a beverage, and let me talk at you for a minute. Today, I would like to talk at you about this game. What a Cowboy from Two Fat Lardies. So this will be my first excursion into a Two Fat Lardies game, but from what I understand, they've been around for a little while and they're pretty well liked. Speaking for myself, I know that I have thoroughly enjoyed the table time that I've spent with this game thus far. It does seem a bit much in the beginning, but that's quickly abated once you see a lot of these things in action. What a Cowboy is an Old West game, but it's not so much historical Old West as it is cinematic Old West. It's meant to feel like playing through kind of like an old spaghetti western, and I think that it achieves that beautifully. The game is available as a printed copy, which is about $40, I think, as well as a PDF, which is about $24. So there's a pretty significant difference between the two. I opted for the PDF and then printed it out and bound it myself. That being said, let's get into it. The book opens with, of course, an introduction, table of contents, and then the very, very first thing is the glossary. Love that. Love the important keys and terms being placed at the very beginning of the book, especially for people that don't do all of this to their rule books. It's nice to just have that at the beginning. You can flip right to it almost every time, and that's good, especially in the beginning when you're still learning all of that terminology. Then it gives you a quick rundown of the game, which we're going to skip over in lieu of the slightly deeper dive that we're all about to embark upon together. So let's discuss what you're going to need. And the vast majority of what you're going to need for this game are D6s. Lots and lots of D6s, preferably, in my opinion, in different colors. So you need 6 dice per character. So if you're playing minimum 4 models, you need at least 24 D6s. You need some other D6s for rolling your weapons, for actually rolling your damage and things like that. Tape measure, game is measured in inches, but obviously if you wanted to play it down to 15 millimeter, that's definitely doable. Just convert everything to centimeters. It should work fine. Character cards, which is just a deck of playing cards. Nothing fancy there. A record sheet, which is easily available online. It was so easy to find the character sheet and print it out for this game. Love that. It's a bummer when you've got to hunt down the character sheet. You need dice to keep up with your ammunition or some other means of ammunition tracker. You need a special token to represent bonanzas. At most, you'll need, in the beginning, you'll probably need 2 to 4 of these, depending on how your initial list is built. And then you need Desperado cards. Now, the Desperado cards are a separate deck of playing cards, and if I'm not mistaken, Joe told me that there is a list online that lists what all of them do. Desperado cards represent special things that your characters can do. And they're drawn from a deck, and like the 7 of clubs is going to be a certain thing. And there is a list out there where you can just use a regular deck, use a second deck of cards, and draw for the Desperados from there, and then look up what they are on the chart. The actual printed one is also available for purchase, and I don't think it's particularly pricey. Now, at this point, I'm going to be doing a little bit of jumping around in the book in order to lay things out in an order that makes sense to me. So, getting to it, you're going to need some models, 4 to 6. You're going to need a board of 3x3 or 4x4. We've been playing on a 4x4, but I think a 3x3 would probably work. And once you've got the table, terrain, and all of those other things that we just mentioned gathered together, it's time to finally play the game. So initiative is determined by the player deck. You will be dealt cards equal to the number of members of your roster. So if you have 4 people in your roster, you'll get an ace, 2, 3, 4 of the spades or clubs. The other person will get ace, 2, 3, 4 of hearts or diamonds. It's easier if you have more than that, then you can go specifically by a certain suit. Like I'm spades, your clubs, your hearts, your diamonds. But if there's just 2 of you, it's easier to just say take black versus red. You draw from the top of that deck. Whoever's card is drawn there gets to activate. I love random activation systems. Love them. I love them even more, I think, when it's like this, where it's a specific model, not just randomly who gets to go. But with larger games like with Bolt Action, something like that, or Erewhon, or the other game that they make, Antares, it's just too much. It's just too much to have each dice or card or whatever assigned to specific units without having to do a lot of extra bookkeeping. In a skirmish, it's very easy. You just mark who's the ace, who's the 2, who's the 3, who's the 4, and go. Once you've figured out which model is going to activate in the turn, that model then takes their action dice pool and rolls it. Now, the action dice, in addition to determining what you can do with a model, are also it's also the health of the model. When you're wounded, you can have wounded or shocked or critically wounded, you can have dice move to the shock pool where they can be restored. You can get those back, or you can have them permanently removed. When you're out of action dice, you're done. Model's out of play. When you roll those dice, you have the potential for 6 different things. They are move, spot, aim. 4 and 5 are a shoot/reload, and 6 is an aces high. Let's talk through what those things mean. And because it's logical, we'll start at the beginning with 1, move. So, a move dice can be used for a couple of different things. Obviously, it can be used to move. It can also be used to remove a pin token, which you get when you get shot or dodge or fall down or lose control of your horse or anything like that. It's something that has to be dealt with before you can do anything else. So if you have a pin token, you have to spin a move dice to remove that pin token before you can do anything else. And it can be used to stand back up. The first time you use one of them to move, you roll 2d6, that's how far you can move. Any subsequent movement dice that you spend on moving around the board, they each get you 1d6 of movement. But you can break up those dice. So you could move and then do some other stuff and then use another move dice. You've got freedom in order of play. There's no order of operations in terms of when you do the things that you roll up with your action dice. That's basic movement on foot. Also on movement, and this is something that I'm just catching that I think we may have done this wrong once or twice in our games. When you roll that movement, you are obligated to move that full movement unless you declare ahead of time that you are going to stop at a particular thing. Before you roll your dice, you need to declare which direction you're moving in. During that phase, if you're like, I want to get to these barrels, then you can roll and you can stop at those barrels prematurely. But those things need to be said ahead of time. If you'd like to turn, because facing does matter in the game, then you still need to spend a movement dice even if you just want to turn on the spot. No freebies. During that basic move, you can go over one simple thing, like a low fence or some crates or water trough. Simple, kind of the inch or less rule, you can get over one of those for free. Moving inside of a building is unobstructed. There's no special things to it. You don't really count the terrain that's inside of there. You can just move through as you please. Next comes your enhanced movement, which covers a wider range of things, such as crossing bigger obstacles, which the first one you can go over for free, just like in the basic. Any other minors will cost a move dice per obstacle to get over. A major obstacle always requires a dice to get over, and then stairs and ladders cost a dice to get up or down. Difficult ground, you're rolling 2d6, discarding the lower. The higher dice is the number of inches that you can move. If you're still in that difficult ground and wish to move again, you do 2 more dice, again discarding the lower of the 2. If you're carrying heavy stuff or pushing a vehicle or a wagon, Other friendly characters or henchmen within 4 may lend a hand. And then we go to the removing of the pin, which we mentioned earlier. What I did not mention earlier is that when you remove a pin, you get a 1-inch reposition from where you stand up. Other options include climbing, like genuinely climbing. We're not talking about just kind of vaulting over a big haystack or something, but genuinely trying to scale something. You need to first play your move dice. You roll 2d6, and you move the lower one. To continue climbing, it will cost you 2 more movement dice. And again, you climb the distance of the lower one. If you roll doubles, you fall down with a penalty modifier to that. And when you're climbing, you can't do anything else. So you can't, dead shot it off the side of the barn. You are committed and focused on that climb. So you can't do any of those things. You also cannot dodge if shot at. When it comes to jumping, you can jump a 1-inch gap or up to a 1-inch gap with no problems. If you want to go further than that, you're rolling 2d6 and taking the lower number, and that is how far you can jump. You can jump down as well as across, but when you do, a fall test must be taken if the drop is more than 1 inch. If you're also jumping across a gap, you can reduce the distance successfully jumped by 2 inches for every 1 inch of height gain. That's if you're going up. So if you have to take a fall test, you're rolling 1d6. You then have some modifiers such as falling from a horse, falling from a galloping horse, or falling from a building or height. Apply your modifiers and then check the table. 1 to 4 is nothing, and at the top of it you have a 7, being that you have to roll on the critical wound table and receive a pin token. It can mess you up pretty bad. We then have tasks, which are split into some categories. You have simple, difficult, and very difficult. You undertake the task by applying a move dice to it. The first move dice is a roll of d6. Any further move dice are treated as a +1 modifier. And then you roll on the chart, and for a simple one, your target number is 4. For a difficult, your target number is 8. And for a very difficult task, your target number is 12. A task is usually going to be something that's going to be given to you by the scenario. We then come to mounted movement, which I'm going to touch on briefly. The beginning out moves, it works the exact same as regular movement. Declare your direction, roll your 2d6. You are allowed a single 180 up to 180 degree turn at any point in the movement. Difficult ground, 2d6, take the lower. Some special rules for galloping, jumping obstacles. There are times where you could potentially be thrown off the horse or other things where you can lose control of the animal. If that happens, roll a d6 and check the chart. It can go from ranging at a 1, the horse rears up and the character falls and you have to take a fall test, to a 5 or a 6, success. Your horse is brought under control and starts facing in the direction in the player wishes. Which is good. I like that. That's very kind of lends to that cinematic feel of the horse potentially something happened, or the animal getting spooked or losing control and it popping up and you're trying to hang on. I like that a lot. I don't currently have mounted versions of my models, so that's something to look for in the future. You can tether your horse up. You can whip the horse to get it to go faster, to get better results. And that's kind of about all we're going to touch on for mounted movement. It's not that much different. There's a few extra things that I'm just not going to dedicate the time to go into those because I feel there are more important aspects that we should spend our time talking about right now. Any 2s that you roll are spot dice. And this was a part of the book that I had to play it to understand it. It's not particularly hard. My brain just couldn't math it. So spotting is something that has to be done in order to shoot someone. You got to spot them out of the terrain or whatever and see them. There are 2 main types of cover, and then area cover. So a building would be area. If you're behind a building, that totally blocks line of sight. But if you're poking out from the corner of the building, it's cover. So you figure out the cover, and then you consult this chart over here. So if the range between you and them is 12 or less, there's no effect. If the range is 12 to 24, it's 1. If it's each additional unit of 12 past 24 is another 1. So you go through the chart, you go through the pluses, the minuses, you figure out how many spot dice you need to see them, and then you can figure out if you have enough spot dice to see them. Obviously, if you need to know that range, you can measure those things before you take your shot. Next, we come to the 3s, which are aims, which are pretty basic. Aim is a way to improve your shot. You don't have to do it. As long as you spotted the target and you can see them, you can take your shot. But aiming will help. Now, something that I don't think, it hasn't come up yet in the games that we have played. But if you aim at something and you don't shoot at it that turn, that aim can be carried over to the next turn, providing that the target doesn't move out of line of sight, the aiming character doesn't move or reload or be forced to dodge or is wounded. If that happens, then the benefit is lost. For every aim dice you spend, you get a +1 modifier to your shoot, which is the 4 and 5 dice rolls from your action dice pool. So once you've spent any spot dice that you need to spend, once you've allocated and spent any aim dice that you might have, it's time to spend those 4s and 5s to take a shot. So when we do that, obviously you have to have spotted the target, and it has to be in your front 180. You roll a d6, and we consult a simple chart. Simple modifiers: a pistol, if you're within 4, is +1. If you get, for each aim dice you use, you get +1. For using an aim shot with a rifle and you're more than 12 inches away, because they're more accurate over long ranges, is another +1. And if you get a 1 to a 4, you miss. If you get a 5 or 6 or more, you hit. Once you hit, it's not quite a done deal, because they still get the opportunity to dodge. When a character dodges, if it's in the open, they need a 5 or a 6. If they have a pin in the open, they can't dodge at all. If they're in cover, they need a 4, 5, or 6. And if they have a pin, they can still dodge, I believe. When I printed this, there was some user error, so I kind of it lopped off part of the bottom of each page. So there's a couple of sentences here and there that I'm missing that I've pieced together from looking at the actual PDF. On a failed dodge, you take your damage. When you take that damage, it is comparing the number rolled for the shot to a damage chart. A 5 is shock. A 6 is a wound. A 7 or higher is critical damage. And it'll tell you a 5 is shock, you just move one of your action dice to the pool. On a wound, it's 1 to the pool and you lose 1 permanently. On a critical wound, it's 1 to the pool, 1 permanently, and a roll on a table that can have some pretty gnarly effects on your character. However, on a successful dodge, you don't take damage, but you do get a pin token. If you are adjacent to a structure that blocks line of sight, a dodge will always force you back out of line of sight. So if you're at the corner of a building and you dodge, you're always going to dodge down the side of the building out of line of sight. If there is cover or area cover within 4 inches, you are allowed to dodge behind that. If you're a legend or a gunslinger, you can do that, go for that in any direction. If you're a shootist or a greenhorn, then that dodge cannot bring you closer to the enemy. It has to take you away from them. If you're already behind cover, a successful dodge will just have you hunker down. If you are in the open with no cover, then a successful dodge means that you just hit the ground, you gain a pin token, and you are still visible. In the other examples, such as behind cover, hunkering down, or anything that's not out of line of sight, the shooter needs to spend another spot dice immediately in order to continue shooting at them. And that's something that I believe we have made a mistake with in our games. But it's going to happen. It's a new game. we're both learning the new game, those kinds of things are going to happen. And it's okay that they happen because that's how we learn. If you roll a 1 during your dodge attempt, you stumble. You apply the effect of the failed dodge, so you're going to be on the ground, you're going to have your pin token, but you're also going to be moving one of your action dice to the shock pool. Another very cool part of shooting that I want to touch on is the effect of double barrels. Things like a shotgun, you can just unleash the side-by-side or the over-under just at the same time and just let it go. When you do that, you cannot aim at all. You're just kind of pointing it in their general direction and hoping you catch something. But when you do that, you roll 3d6, and any hits are hits. The opponent gets to dodge 1 time, regardless of how many times they're hit, but if they are successful on that dodge, they dodge all of the hits. And I think that is a beautifully written little piece of rulage. I like that a great. We already discussed the wounding bits, and I mentioned earlier that once a character has no more action dice remaining, they either flee the table or are badly wounded and deemed out of action. In either case, they are removed from play. If the character out of action has lost more action dice to the shock pool than those permanently, the character fled the table. If the out of action character lost 3 or more permanently, they are badly wounded. You remove them from the table, and then you would consult the badly wounded portion of the postgame for playing campaign games. For playing a one-off or a pickup game, doesn't matter. But if you're playing a continuous linked set of games, which is what we will be doing, it does. Falling when wounded, such as if you're on a balcony or leaning out of a window or mounted on a horse and you take a wound or critical wound, you are at the risk of falling. You roll a d6. If you suffered a wound, you fall on a roll of a 1. If it was a critical wound, you fall on a 1 or a 2. If you're on unstable platforms like a roof or a moving stagecoach or anything like that, then you get a -1 to that roll. The game also includes something that I think is really, really fun. It kind of accounts for collateral damage, and that's a near miss. If I shoot at something and I miss it, and there's another model within a 2-inch line of that shot from me to my target, that person can potentially be hit. You roll a d6. On a 1, a friendly character or townsfolk is hit. On a 2 to 5, it misses everyone. And on a 6, an enemy character is hit. If there are multiple friendly or multiple enemy, then obviously those would be hit. If there is no enemy, then I think it would have to hit or have the chance. Like a 6 wouldn't matter, only the 1 would matter, is my understanding. If you're carrying anything other than your basic loadout when you get shot, then you have to roll a d6 because you might drop it. So on a 4 to 6, you hang on to it. On a 1 to 3, you drop it. In the last section, in the shooting section, is the other thing that a shoot dice can be used for, which is to reload your weapon. If you have 1 shot left, or if you are out of line of sight, you can spend reload dice to reload your weapon. You can spend as many reload dice as you have. However, you can't load up more cartridges than the weapon will hold. Doesn't work that way. And then we come to 6s. Those aces high dice, where you have several options that you can perform. The first is to use it as a wild dice, where you just switch it to any other result of 1 through 5 that you please. You can also use it for shock recovery, so you can take a dice for each 6 that you spend. You can take a dice that was moved to your shock pool and restore it to your regular action pool. We then come to trick shooting, and this is really cool. This is a big piece of that cinematic feel that they wanted to create with the game. So let's say you want to do something crazy like shoot through a wall or up through the floor or down through the roof. You need to be within 12 inches. You need to spend the ace high, the 6. You need to spend a spot, which is a 2, and you need to spend a shoot, which is a 4 or 5. So you got to have 3 dice handy. You then roll 3d6 against the character's level, which is a chart. So a legend is a 3, a gunslinger is a 4, a shootist is a 5, and I assume that a greenhorn would be a 6. If all 3 are equal to or greater than the level, the shot is successful, target takes a wound. If 2 are equal or greater, it's partially successful. Target moves an action dice to their shock pool. And if 1 is equal to or greater, then the character skill level, then the target gets a pin token. So you're going to get something. You may not get the best result. Obviously, the better the quality of the model shooting, the better chance you've got of doing something cool. If all 3 fail, however, your shot ricochets and hits you. Fire takes a pin token, and you move an action dice to your shock pool. So, penalties. F around, find out, I guess. We then have another very cool section, which is Hollywood stunts, which is like you want to dive through the saloon window and roll and come up ready to shoot. You can use 6s to do stuff like that. However, it can never have more than 2 parts to it, so you got to keep it somewhat simple. You roll, if it's going to be something that's especially difficult, you can add a modifier to it, +1 or +2. You roll the dice, 2d6, and if they are both equal to or better than the character's level, then you do the thing. If one of them is equal or better, you complete the stunt, but you gain a pin token. Move dice must be played to remove it as per normal before any of the remaining actions, just like a normal pin. If both fail, it has failed spectacularly. You gain a pin token, and you immediately take a fall test, adding +2 to the dice roll. Now, in that section, we haven't gotten to this yet, but it does mention that a Bonanza token may be used to re-roll any set of dice, including a skill test, but both dice must be re-rolled. Now, if you happen to roll 3 6s, you get to roll on a random encounters table. And this can be good stuff, bad stuff, or benign stuff. You then have the option to either keep those aces and just spend them freely, or to exchange those 3 aces for 1 Bonanza token. If you roll 4 aces, that is an 8s and aces. That is a dead man's hand. You gain 1 Bonanza token, you finish your activation, and then the turn ends. During that, there is a pause where all characters fully reload weapons and any pin tokens are removed. Alternatively, those 4s and 5s can be used for brawling. If you are in base-to-base contact, instead of shooting, you can punch them. If you have a knife for brass knucks or anything like that, you can draw them and use them by spinning a reload dice. So then you're going to roll a d6, or you're going to see how many brawling dice you have. So each shoot dice that you allocate is 1. Higher character level. Each ace high that's allocated. Weapon and skill benefits. Being mounted. Galloping. Attacking over an obstacle. You have the dice. Figure out how many dice you've got and then roll. And then the defender figures out their brawling dice by also checking a chart. Even with modifiers for the defender or the attacker, you're always going to have at least 1 brawling dice. The attacker will then roll those dice. Depending on what kind of weapon you use will depend on what you need. So like your fists are going to be like a 5 or a 6, whereas a sword or a bayonet is going to be a 3, 4, 5, 6. And both players are doing this. Total up the number of hits for both players. Compare the number of hits scored with each hit canceling out another hit. And the character with 1 or more net hits will win the fight. Once all of those dice have been rolled, with everything canceling everything out, you consult the Brawling results table. It can range from no successes for anybody, a fight being a draw, to a 4+ being a critical wound, and the character losing, and then moving them 4 inches as they just got their, moving them 4 inches away as their clock just got cleaned. If you happen to be brawling on horseback, it works pretty much the same, but you always get to add an extra brawling dice and a second extra brawling dice if you are galloping on your way in. When engaging in a brawl, you do have the option to attempt to take your opponent hostage. You have to declare that beforehand, but if you do that, you're only going to deal shock. You're not going to deal any actual permanent action dice loss to them. On a wound, it would be 2 shock. On a critical wound, 3 shock. If you get a 4 or more net successes, then you wrestle them to the ground and take them hostage. That's pretty cool. Go tie him to some train tracks. We then come to those Bonanza tokens that we've mentioned several times up to now. So a Bonanza can be used for 3 different things. To interrupt another player's activation, to fast draw, which is a result usually of interrupting their activation, or to gamble. Different models will start with different amounts of Bonanza tokens depending on their level. A shootist will have 1, a gunslinger will have 2, a legend will have 3. When you use it to interrupt an activation, you must shout Bonanza with vigor and gusto, or it doesn't count. No other character can interrupt the Bonanza, but the active character must immediately stop their activation. Now, when that Bonanza is declared, the active player has the option to spend one of their Bonanza tokens, also shouting it with vigor and gusto, in order to declare and activate a fast draw, which is exactly what it sounds like. Both of your models are going to roll a d6. You're going to add the level of the character that you're rolling the dice for, and whoever has the highest one will get to activate. If it's the original Bonanza shouter, then they get to do their activation. If it's the active player, they get to finish their activation, and then the Bonanza player who was trying to interrupt would get to use theirs. When you are, as the person declaring the initial Bonanza, you don't get to use your full pool of action dice. If you're a green horde, it's current -4. Shootist is current -3, then -2, -1 as you go up through the skill levels. We then come to gambling, which is part of it that Joe and I have not used yet, but we probably will in the next game maybe. So when you gamble, you are spending a Bonanza dice to do one of 2 things. Either to re-roll a dice or a hand of dice, so that could be like re-rolling your action dice pool, or re-rolling a shoot roll or a dodge roll. Or you can spend it to roll 1d6 to remove action dice from your shock pool. So you roll a d3 and then you remove the requisite amount. So 1 and 2 is 1, 3 and 4 is 2, 5 and 6 is 3. We then come to henchmen. Those ne'er-do-well or maybe young deputies that want to forge a name for themselves out west. So there are many things that henchmen do the same as regular models, but there are also some key differences that we want to touch on. First of all, a group of henchmen is always made up of 3 models. They start with 6 action dice that they spend and use like anybody else. When they move, they all move together. So each action dice is moving the whole group unless there's only one guy left. They spot just like regular characters. Aim is a little bit different. They can only aim if there is a friendly character within 6 inches and line of sight to them. When they shoot, they can spend as many shoot dice as there are henchmen. So if you got 3, you could spend 3 shoot dice if you had them. If you got 2, then 2, 1, then 1. They're always considered to have basically pistols, so effective range of 12, maximum range of 24. You do reload and tracking ammunition like normal guys. They always have ammunition unless when they attack they roll more 1s than 6s. If that happens, then they are out of ammunition and they need 2 reload dice before they can fire again. With aces high, it's a little bit different. It's kind of like the aim. They need a friendly within 6 and line of sight to play multiple aces high. If they don't have that, then they can only spend a maximum of 1 per activation. However, the henchmen cannot use aces high dice on themselves to remove shock. A character, however, that is within 6 inches can spend one of their ace highs to recover 1 shock for the henchman or to remove a pin token from the group. Or maybe they can do it themselves, but a character can also do it. It represents the character rallying up the guys. A legend or a gunslinger, not any character, but a legend or a gunslinger, can also play an ace high to get a follow me order, which is a group of henchmen within 6 follow and move with him, usually going to end their activation within 6 unless the character tells them to stop at a specific point. It does not count as an activation for the henchman when they receive that follow me order. Once all the action dice have been spent for all of the characters, going of course in order based on the deck of cards, you end the turn. Now when you end the turn, you're going to check to see if you've won or not by scenarios, or by seeing if your opponents run away, which is called a ride or die. You check for ride or die at the end of the turn. To do that, you're going to add up the morale of all the characters on your side still in play. Legends are 6, Gunslingers 4, Shooters 2, Greenhorns 1, Henchmen 0, but they give you a +1 modifier to the dice roll. You then reduce that number by 1 point for every 2 points of shock across the whole force. You then get your +1 for any henchmen that are within 6 inches of a character. If that number is equal to or below their ride or die rating, a ride or die test occurs. And again, your ride or die rating is half of your total force morale value. So if you have a total force morale of 8, your ride or die value would be 4. Once you've sorted out whether or not you need to take a ride or die test, to actually take the test, you roll a number of d6, which is determined by the highest level character that you still have on the board. Gunslingers are 4, or Legends are 4, Gunslingers 3, Shooters 2, Greenhorns 1. If you do not roll any 6s on those dice, you run away. You failed the test. You flee the field. If 1 or more 6s rolled, then you're good to go. And if 2 or more 6s are rolled, your gang has cojones and will roll an additional d6 when taking all subsequent ride or die tests. We then come into a quick section about Townsfolk. So when you're setting up your game, you roll 6d6. Any 3, 4s, or 5s are a Townsfolk figure placed, and any 6s are groups of 3 Townsfolk placed. Starting with the defender, you go back and forth to place the Townsfolk or groups of Townsfolk around the table. If a Townsfolk is in blocking line of sight, they always count as cover. At the end of the turn, they will have a reaction. If no shots were fired, they're assumed to be just going about their business. However, if a character or henchman shoots while within 6 or moves within an inch of them, they will react. And then, of course, there's a handy-dandy table where you roll a d6 to see what they will do. You also have the option, I'm not going to go through all the parts of it, but you do have the option to use them as a human shield, which is, again, a great cinematic feel. Next in the book is the section for building your game, which I will say is very simple and straightforward, but we will talk about it in another video. Skipping over that, we come to sneaky tricks and varmints, which are things that you can pay for when you're doing your equipment. Gives you like movable deployment zones, henchman groups, stuff like that. We then come into the actual campaigns and scenarios, which is where you have to go through and roll to set up your campaign map. We'll go through those steps in the same video that we go through setting up and creating our game. There are generally 6 scenarios in a campaign, and happily enough, there are 6 scenarios in the book. You can choose to play them in order, or you can choose to not. That's kind of up to you how you want to do those things. And of course, if you want to make up your own scenarios to keep your campaign going longer, you're absolutely welcome to, because you're going to have more spots on the map than you have scenarios if you just play the scenarios in the book. And if you wanted to go through and play a scenario in each location on your map and you wanted to come up with scenarios catered to those pieces of the map, more power to you. Please share them with me. It then goes through the post-game steps, which I'm not going to go into that here. We'll see a little bit closer how that works in the first campaign game that we play. But it's your pretty standard wound and injury and death table. Check your reputation, and then do your leveling, your enhancements, and then you can check for map control and things that's going to give you. After every game, you have the opportunity to recruit new gang members. If a gang character is killed, you can roll to replace the player, may replace them with a new recruit by rolling on the character generation table below, and then just going through those steps. We then have some stuff for balancing campaign games, like because sometimes in campaigns you can have like a snowball effect where one player just keeps winning or just keeps getting massively ahead of the other one, and it can make for some sometimes unfun situations. This, however, only applies in games 2 through 5. It's to keep the middle of the campaign somewhat close. The first game, you should be equal, so it shouldn't matter. The 6th game is the grand finale, so you don't do it there. It works by calculating your total force morale, and then checking the deficit. And there's a chart for that deficit. If it's a difference of 1, there's no effect. 2 to 3, you get an additional henchman group, things like that to, again, try to keep it balanced so that you don't get that snowball of just everything going right for one person and everything going wrong for another person. There's also another fun mechanism in here for giving that person who's been trailing a chance to win. And it's called the Underdog Gambit. So if their force morale is 5 or more below the winners, or the person who's ahead, they can choose to play their gambit. And you immediately skip to game 6, just disregarding any other missions that would need to be played. And whoever wins that mission claims the town and victory of the campaign. So you can be ahead a chunk of the game, and if you get too far ahead, your opponent, and if they just have good rolls that game, it kind of stops that player from being able to get further ahead and gives them hopefully a little bit of a chance. And that, my friends, is What a Cowboy. So the price point is pretty average for a rule book. No complaints there. Again, I opted for the PDF because it was a little bit cheaper, and I was at that time buying many different rule books. I was kind of stocking up the library for the new year. Terrain-wise, it can vary. Now, you could opt, if you have a limited amount of terrain, you could opt to play most of your games out in the wilderness or in very, very small run-down towns. I have taken this personally as an opportunity to expand my terrain collection into that kind of Wild West type of biome. But you can absolutely choose to keep it simple with, some mostly desert terrain, maybe a couple rock formations and some cactus groupings. You can also go all in like Joe and I have decided to do and end up with enough buildings to make a pretty fleshed out town between the two of us. But again, that's up to you as the player and at your discretion as to how far you want to take those things. After having played this a couple of times, I will say that it is a lot of bookkeeping, but the bookkeeping is not bad because you're using the dice to do it. So it's very tactile and manipulative, as opposed to me having a piece of paper where I have to constantly be checking things off or writing things down or making notes of something. So that worried me when I was reading this. Like, man, this is so much to keep up with. But the way you do it, if you use dice or counters or anything like that, is very, very, very functional. It works very, very well. Again, that was a cause for me because bookkeeping is something that can take me out of a game. I don't mind some of it, but if it's excessive, then I'm spending more time focusing on that and not enough time focusing on the game and the narrative and the story and what's happening on the table in front of me. It takes me out of the moment and out of the immersion, and that's kind of a bummer. All in all, we've played 2 games. I am enjoying it thoroughly. I'm looking forward to, we're supposed to be getting another game this week or next week. I'm thoroughly excited for that. I think this game is very good. I don't know if it's a great gateway game for a new gamer because there is a lot here, but anywhere from advanced novice to veteran, I would say can have a good time with this game. If you're looking for a cowboy game to introduce someone to wargaming in general, this one might not be it. But that's okay. Not all games are for all players or all levels of players. That's going to do it for today, my friends. Thanks for coming by, hanging out, grabbing a chair. You could have shared some snacks with me, but that's cool. I don't hold it against you. I'm a little stingy with my plate sometimes, too. Thank you. Thank you so much for stopping by, letting me talk at you for a minute. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.